Thanksgiving was supposed to be a time for family and gratitude. Instead, it became the stage for my final act of betrayal. As I sat at the dinner table, pretending to laugh, pretending to care, I knew what was coming. Paige, so sure of herself, didn't see it. But I did. I had planned it all. The confrontation, the truth bomb. But as the moment approached, doubt crept in. Was this really what I wanted? Was revenge enough to heal the scars she left on my heart? Chapter 7. Thanksgiving. That Saturday, I made it through dinner with Rob and Dana. Paige was playing the part of the loving wife, always keeping a hand on me. This had been going on for days. If I had been suspicious, I might have thought she knew what I was planning and was trying to cover it up. After dinner, I was in a bad mood. I had to pretend to be happy for both sisters. Rob was especially full of himself that evening, and I had to sit there and act interested. I think I fooled them, but I was relieved that this kind of gathering wouldn't happen again. The following Thursday, we were going to her parents' house for Thanksgiving dinner. I had been getting ready for that night. I kept my daily routine the same, working through the week. Paige saw me being the same person every day, and I tried to be more affectionate toward her. She seemed to respond, but it was clear that she was growing impatient with my choice to avoid deeper connection. Work was a distraction from my marriage. Noelle was in her office, and I worried about her during the holidays. No matter what was happening with Paige, I promised myself I would be there for my friend. Keeping that promise was hard. Since my meeting with Hollis, I had become more difficult at work. I was moody and snapped at my colleagues and clients. I was not being easy to deal with. Only Noelle seemed to cope with my moods. She was unfazed by my attempts to be difficult. We found ourselves in her office on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. The building was quiet. We were the last ones there. Both of us had little to look forward to except each other's company. We should have left, but instead we focused on reviewing our open sales opportunities. After discussing our last topic, I thought it would be nice to talk about something more personal. I'm a bit sad that I wasn't invited over for dinner this Thursday. Is Muriel cooking? I really liked her bright smile. It appeared again as her eyes lit up. No, Mom isn't cooking this Thursday. It's my Aunt Claudia's turn, her oldest sister. But you talk as if I can't cook. I want you to know that I'm a very good cook. Is that so? Should I guess that you're the one cooking this holiday? Actually, I make a fantastic eggs Florentine, but no, my mother-in-law is taking charge this Thanksgiving. Noelle took a moment before responding. I take it everything is going well for you? My marriage is over, Noelle. She sighed heavily. I'm so sorry to hear that. I know how much you cared for her. If I could do anything to make it better for you, I would. It will be after this Friday when I make it official. But first, there's the gathering. I'll share the news after dinner. I could tell my face showed my feelings. I didn't want to keep anything from Noelle. She frowned at my last words. Public? You're not going to make a scene in front of her family, are you? Why not? They deserve to know everything about Paige. Noelle leaned closer and spoke softly. Peter, you can't do that. Whatever Paige has done, it's still between you and her. I get that you're upset, but doing it on Thanksgiving with her family around isn't right. I know you don't want to hurt her family, too. They'll find out about your divorce soon enough. There's no need to make it worse or ruin their holiday. Have you ever been tested for health issues? I saw Noelle flinch in surprise. Well, I have. It was very upsetting. Paige needs to understand how that feels. I can only imagine how hard that was, she said. But nothing, Noelle. He got her pregnant. I let that sink in. I should have said that she allowed it to happen. The reason wasn't clear in the report. Noelle looked as hurt as I felt. Maybe now she would see why I had to confront Paige. Why did she let that happen? She asked. I don't know. She claimed to have ended it soon after. I can see in your eyes that you want to confront this, but please don't do it. Whatever you're thinking, don't. If you go down that path, it might change you forever. There's more to this, Noelle. There are other things I can't even share with you. I know what I plan to do won't make things fair. Peter, nothing you do will make things right. Even if you embarrassed her in front of her family, it wouldn't change anything. You'd still feel empty. It might sound odd, but living well is the best way to move forward. Her words hit me hard. She quoted a poet I read in high school. I remembered another saying from him, "The best mirror is an old friend." Noelle was right. I did want to make Paige feel some of the pain she gave me. Even though my wife didn't care about my feelings, she would care about what her family thought. The problem was it would be awkward to carry out that plan, given my place in the family. My in-laws had always treated me kindly. They welcomed me, and I enjoyed spending time with them. My feelings toward Paige didn't include any anger toward her parents or brothers. The only person in the family I had issues with was Dana. I looked at Noelle for a moment before speaking. "You're right." I sighed and looked away. It felt uncomfortable to appear so uncertain in front of her. "So, I take it you're moving on Friday?" she asked quickly. "No, I'm moving Thursday night. Most of my things are at my father's house. I'm leaving almost everything behind. I'll only take my clothes and my car since the lease is in my name and I'm still making payments." A heavy silence filled the space between us. Noelle looked pained, and I suppose I looked similar. For some reason, I felt the need to share something else, a way to show I wasn't indifferent about all this. I also gave her one last gift. "I paid the rent through the end of the year," I said, trying to smile. "It's funny. I'm paying so much for that place, and we could have found something better for less, but she wanted that specific building with that view." I smiled faintly as I talked about what was left of my marriage. "This separation will definitely help my budget. It's not worth it to keep things as they were." Looking into Noelle's eyes, I continued, "Thank you for reminding me. Trying to get back at her on Thanksgiving would be very wrong. It was just a nice thought." "I can see why you'd think that," she laughed, then began to get up. "I didn't want to leave just yet. I wanted our goodbye to feel good. Is it true that Sanderson is leaving at the end of the month? How did you hear that?" "I have my connections just like you, so is it true?" She reached for her coat. "You know I can't say. Why don't you ask your connections? They probably know as much as I do." "Are you free this evening?" I asked. "Not really. Why?" she replied. "You're invited to dinner at my place. I'll be cooking." "I'm not sure. Will Muriel be there in case you need help?" "I can cancel the invite if you'd like." I grabbed my coat. "No, I actually want to see how your cooking turns out." That got me the smile I had hoped for. Dinner was lovely, especially having nice company. I found myself thinking about Kevin Connolly. I felt a bit jealous and annoyed that he seemed to think my support meant he could be closer to her. As I left her home, I wondered how I would get more invitations. It felt hopeful in an otherwise tough situation. 2 days later, on a chilly Thursday afternoon, I drove my wife and me to her parents' house for dinner. We would be the last to arrive, as Paige wanted to be the center of attention. She also wanted to go in first before I parked the car. My in-laws lived in a cozy cottage in Drexel Hill. It was a well-kept house with a small lawn and a modest Japanese maple tree. The house had a humble feel, much like its owners. Maybe that's why Paige always wanted to make a grand entrance. I came in a few minutes after her. As I looked around the living room, I noticed every face, every glance, every sign of humor or nervousness. It was Paige's family, and even though I tried to stay neutral, I liked most of them. They welcomed me warmly as I made my way to the coat closet. Would they still feel that way about me after tonight? I glanced toward the kitchen and saw my wife talking to her mother and sister. Paige was very close to her family. As the first in her family to graduate college, she had earned a lot of pride, which she enjoyed. Even her dress tonight seemed meant to showcase that pride. I had thought of ways to bring her down a peg in their eyes. I remembered my last talk with Noelle. I could still hear her saying that confronting Paige this way wasn't right. There were better ways to handle things. Her family shouldn't have to see their daughter and sister in an unfavorable light. Bringing in those who loved her would only cause hurt. Public embarrassment wasn't necessary. I understood Noelle's thoughts. She knew me well enough to know how hard it would be for me to act against Paige in front of everyone. Her words made me think. I looked back at Paige by the doorway to the kitchen. She had a strong presence. Tall and confident, she seemed to light up the room, and I couldn't help but be drawn to her. But I realized her confidence also hid an arrogance that kept her at a distance from the rest of us. She was not meant to be my future. I should have seen that much earlier. This was going to be my last family gathering. I tried to act normally, so I walked over to Paige's dad. He was watching a football game with his sons. They welcomed me and made space for me on the couch as I joined them. The game was exciting. If I didn't know about Paige's choices, I might have enjoyed it. Instead, I found myself watching her dad closely during the game. He was a passionate man who worked hard and found joy in being with his family. I liked him. He accepted me without hesitation as his son-in-law. His sons appreciated his trusting nature. In a way I couldn't explain, I would miss them. There was a sense of decency in that house. Thankfully, I could still see it. I wasn't clouded by anger. Knowing I had an easy way out lifted my spirits for the rest of the game. By evening, her mom served dinner, showcasing her skills as a cook and hostess. I followed her children's lead and ate heartily, laughing and chatting in between bites. Mom was happy to have everyone together again. I tried to be the perfect guest, joining in conversations, laughing at jokes, and being as clever as I could. The only awkward moment was between Dana and Rob. It seemed they were having a disagreement. Rob looked surprised as Dana expressed her concerns in a strong tone. Luckily, Mom stepped in before things escalated. After dessert, as cleanup began, the girls decided their mother deserved a break. They helped her settle into a chair in the living room. When Mom was comfortable, I knew it was time for me to go. I grabbed my jacket and walked into the kitchen. Paige and Dana were washing dishes and sharing a joke when I walked in. "You two work so well together," I said with a smile. Dana turned to me, ready to respond, but Paige interrupted. "Peter, where are you going?" "Home. I have some packing to do for my trip." "I didn't know you were going on a trip. Isn't this a holiday time? Why didn't you say anything sooner? Can you at least wait a few minutes? I'll come with you." "No, I can't wait. I'm sure your sister can take you home." "That's a bit unfair. You can't expect Dana and Rob to drive me when all you have to do is wait a few minutes," Paige replied, sounding upset. She looked confused and frustrated by my sudden decision to leave. "Well, if they can't help, call Richard Lindenhall for a ride. I'm sure Dana has the number if you've forgotten it." At that moment, Dana accidentally dropped the dish she was carrying. Paige looked surprised and opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Just then, Rob walked into the room. He saw his wife covering her mouth and my wife leaning against the counter. Rob looked around and then asked me as I turned to leave, "Hey, what's happening here?" He seemed confused. I didn't particularly care for him, but for a moment I felt bad for him. "Your wife can explain. Just be careful," I replied before leaving. I reached the front door when I suddenly heard noise behind me. It didn't matter anymore. I needed to move on, and this felt like the best way to do it. As I got to my car, I noticed Paige walking toward me. I got inside and drove away. She was shouting something from the sidewalk, but I didn't hear her. Paige Erickson Stewart was now part of my past. She just didn't know it yet. I turned off my phone during the drive. When I arrived home, the other phone was ringing. I unplugged it and started to pack up what was left of my things. For a week, I had quietly moved some clothes out. There wasn't much left to take. This wasn't about being generous. Looking around the apartment, I realized most things belonged to Paige or were bought for her. Most of my money had gone into furniture. I decided to leave it all behind. I thought about taking some cooking supplies since I did all the family cooking, but the idea of taking anything from the kitchen didn't sit right with me. The desktop computer and the entertainment system were the only items that had brought me any happiness lately, and she could have those too. After backing up my files, I wiped the desktop's hard drive. The company had given me a laptop to use. That would have to be enough until I got a new one. I could replace the home entertainment system later. Dad had some TVs I could use in the meantime. When Paige got home, she might think she struck a deal until she realized what I hadn't done. The lease was in both our names and paid up until the year's end. But the new lease for next year was still on my desk, ready to be signed. If she wanted to stay in the apartment, she would have to pay without me. The bills were all in my name. The phone would be canceled Monday, and I would set up to stop the electric and gas services too. I had paid those until the end of the year as well. The car lease was also in my name. I planned to trade it in for a model I liked better. I would have more debt, but unless she wanted extra payments, Paige probably wouldn't challenge the decision. I wanted to make my feelings clear, so I left my wedding ring on top of the papers next to the phone. There was one thing that would upset her the most. Her tuition for the next semester was still unpaid. I included that bill in the same pile by the phone. She could handle her own matters. I took half the money from our bank accounts, leaving Paige about $11,000. It might seem like a lot, but she would need about $16,000 just for the next semester's tuition and other costs that loans and grants wouldn't cover. An hour later, I was in my old room at my dad's house. Looking around, I felt surprisingly calm. The stress I had felt for months, even years, was gone. Tomorrow, Paige would receive the divorce papers. Although it was a no-fault divorce, I decided to send a copy to Lindenhall's wife along with a personal note. It cost a bit extra because it was the day after Thanksgiving, but it felt worth it. As I expected, my wife started calling my cell phone that Friday and continued for almost a week. I deleted every message without listening. There was nothing left to talk about. My lawyer would handle everything from now on. I didn't want to hear what Paige had to say. A couple of weeks went by without any issues. Then one afternoon, as I returned from a late lunch, I noticed Cheryl, our receptionist, in the lobby. As I approached the glass doors, I saw her making unusual movements with her eyes. I missed the warning until I spotted Paige and Lindenhall sitting in the waiting area. While I kept a neutral expression, I found their presence somewhat amusing. They both got up quickly and walked toward me. I noticed Lindenhall's size. He was a tall man and heavier than me, but he didn't make any moves toward me. He let Paige reach me first while he stayed a few steps back. I caught a hint of intensity on her face. Her voice was charged with emotion. "I've left so many messages. You need to listen to me. Peter, I didn't want to come here, but this is the only place where we can talk." "Paige, this is not the right place. And why is he here?" I replied, still not looking at Lindenhall. I sensed movement to my right and knew that Cheryl was likely getting ready to call security. I turned to see her and Noelle together, with Noelle looking very concerned. She moved as if she wanted to come closer, but stopped when I raised my hand to signal her to stay back. Paige was resolute. She didn't look at my coworkers when she said, "Richard is here to help me. You've involved him and his family in our issue. I wanted to deal with this quietly, but you've forced my hand. Fine, if you want to talk, let's do it. There's a restaurant around the corner." I glanced at the time and added, "The lunch rush is probably over, so we can talk there." Turning to Noelle, I reassured her, "It's all right. I'll be back in a few minutes." At the restaurant, we quickly found a booth. I intentionally chose a spot where Paige and Lindenhall would sit next to each other. I wanted to observe both of their expressions since she seemed to be the spokesperson for them. "Peter, you've been acting strangely since Thanksgiving. At first, I thought it was just jealousy because I was in school. But when you moved out and I got the divorce papers, I realized things had gotten serious. You've hurt me for no reason and made things harder for Richard, too." She glanced at Lindenhall, and I thought he might speak up. Instead, Paige continued, appearing distressed. "First, Richard and I are just study partners. There's nothing beyond that. I'm not having an affair. I don't know why you think that, but you're mistaken, and it concerns me greatly. You've caused misunderstandings and impacted his family. He's considering legal action against you. Did you know that? I've tried to convince him not to, but you don't understand who he is. He and his family could really complicate things for us. I brought him here so you can express your remorse. Then you need to withdraw your filing so all our lives can return to normal." Her speech caught me off guard. I had to admit, my soon-to-be ex-wife was skilled at handling tough situations. If I didn't have proof of her wrongdoings, I might have believed her. She looked convincingly hurt, but the amusement I felt at seeing them was quickly turning to frustration. If I waited any longer to respond, I might say or do something I would regret. Maybe I waited too long, or maybe Lindenhall wanted to assert himself. Whatever the reason, he jumped into the conversation without looking at Paige. "Paige, you're wasting your time with this guy. Listen, I've never been involved with your wife. We've only studied together, but now you're dragging me into your mess. My wife thinks I'm being unfaithful and is threatening to leave. I want my family out of this divorce. If you keep involving me, I'll consider taking legal action against you. I think you should talk to Paige and sort this out, or I'll handle it for you." His voice was loud enough that people at nearby tables were turning to look at us. That really got to me. These two were impossible. What did they think of me? Did Paige think I would yield under their pressure? Did she really think I had misunderstood her answer at her parents' house? Her expression showed as much determination as Lindenhall's. They both seemed to be waiting for me to back down. I felt the need to say something strong. I took a deep breath and rocked gently in my chair for almost a minute, trying to calm my frustration before I spoke. I kept my voice low, knowing they would have to lean closer to hear me. You two are something else. You brought me here to intimidate me? I see both of you very clearly. Am I supposed to worry about a lawsuit? It's only a lawsuit if I say something I know isn't true, and that's not the case here. Then I stood up and faced Lindenhall directly, raising my voice. I have pictures of you, and they're not flattering. I stepped back from the booth and turned to leave. I knew he wouldn't let it end like that. Just as I expected, Lindenhall rushed after me. I turned in time to prepare for his move. He may have been a big guy, but he had some speed and seemed to know how to throw a punch. I knew a thing or two about self-defense. You learn that growing up in the city. This wasn't going to be a delicate situation. I focused on his hands, knowing I needed to take charge quickly. As he swung, I sidestepped, but not fast enough. His fist grazed my jaw and it hurt. Ignoring the pain, I crouched low to lessen his reach. I pretended to throw a quick jab at his face, and he protected himself. Unfortunately for him, that made him overextend his guard, leaving him open. I put all my strength into a solid hit, targeting a sensitive spot. He gasped and instinctively grabbed his hurt area. That blow ended his ability to continue the confrontation. As he bent forward, I quickly stepped to the side and kicked at the back of his knee, causing his leg to buckle. I quickly adjusted my stance and landed a blow to his side as he was going down. Looking back, that might have been a bit much. His body barely reacted. I was breathing harder now as the adrenaline coursed through me. It was too much for him, though. He hit the ground face first with a loud thud, knocking over a couple of chairs on the way down. Paige, who had been quiet until now, suddenly screamed, and so did a few other customers. Her scream made me stop. I had been ready to act as he lay on the ground. I stood still as I saw Paige rush over to help him, while the restaurant owner and some staff hurried to his side. Their arrival brought me back to reality. My anger faded away. I didn't glance at Lindenhall's face again. My focus was on Paige as she helped him. Once I calmed down, I apologized to the owner and said I would wait for the police. She just shook her head and handed me a napkin for my face. Paige, with help from 2 staff members, worked to calm her friend. Lindenhall seemed unaware, only trying to catch his breath. As he slowly came to, Paige urged him that they should leave to avoid trouble with the police. As they tried to help him, Paige kept glancing over at me, but she didn't say anything. I could see she was surprised, perhaps amazed that I had acted the way I did, or maybe taken aback by how quickly things had escalated. I must have looked quite disheveled, covered in blood and on edge. In the next few minutes, I watched as Lindenhall, with Paige's support, managed to leave the restaurant. After they were gone, I started asking people around our table if they had seen the altercation. I wanted to find a witness or two for protection if I encountered him again. Everyone around us seemed unwilling to get involved, but the owner and her cashier agreed to back me up. I noticed the owner looked just as surprised as Paige. Ignoring her expression, I wrote down their names and numbers, telling them I would need their help when the officers arrived. Next, I called Aunt Liz and calmly explained what happened. Just as I expected, she scolded me for getting into a confrontation and for interacting with Paige and her boyfriend. I promised it wouldn't happen again. I also agreed to answer only the questions the officers would ask me. Looking back, I truly regretted the incident. While it felt good to have stood my ground against Lindenhall, I knew better than to act out in public. It was my fault that things escalated. I had provoked him into responding, fully aware of my ability to manage myself. Though others may not have seen it, I knew how angry I had been at the time. Maybe that was the real reason I never became a police officer. I was afraid of my own anger. Being my father's son, I knew that engaging in public disputes was frowned upon, even if my father had taught me how to defend myself. He always said to only fight if I had to protect myself or my family, and that I should stop once I'd neutralized the other person. Lindenhall was alone and not a real threat to me. My dad would see right through my reasons for responding. After I finished meeting with my lawyer, the police walked into the room. I was surprised by how quickly they arrived. They started taking statements from the witnesses. One officer looked at me a bit longer than I was comfortable with after getting my name, but he didn't ask anything more. It seemed like he might recognize me, but I didn't give him any reason to ask. My dad was a well-known officer, and so was my brother. I knew this event would reach their ears soon. When it became clear that I was the one who had been attacked, I had to consider pressing charges against Lindenhall. I couldn't hold back. I gave them his name and address. He might not face serious consequences, but the thought of him feeling frustrated and embarrassed was tempting. I went back to work and tried to forget about what had happened. As soon as I entered the lobby, Cheryl was excited to hear about my time at the restaurant. The bruise on my jaw became an easy topic. I thanked her for trying to warn me, but didn't get into details about the incident. She noticed I didn't want to talk and dropped the subject. Before I could leave, she said, "Hold on, Peter, I'll call Noelle. She wanted to see you when you got back. She was really worried. I had to calm her down when you left. She almost went to the restaurant, but I convinced her to call the police instead." That last part troubled me, even if it explained the quick response of the officers. I never meant to bring such chaos to work. Just as I was thinking about how I could have done things differently, Noelle showed up. For some reason, seeing her made me feel ashamed. She didn't appear angry or upset. It looked like she might even feel relieved. When she came closer, I thought she might extend her arms in concern, but she seemed to hesitate. "Are you okay? Oh my gosh, you're hurt." She took my arm and led me toward the pantry where there was a first aid kit on the wall. I stood there feeling somewhat vulnerable as she took charge. She searched through the kit, but then gave up and turned to a pack of cloth towels, quickly wetting one. She began to gently clean my jaw and the bruise on my face. This was the first time she had ever touched me, and I flinched when her hands brushed against my skin, but her touch was soft and careful. My reaction was more because I was startled than due to any discomfort. Sadly, she seemed to think it was from the injury. "I should have gone with you," she murmured, focusing on my injury. I looked into her eyes and saw they were near tears. She then turned to a cabinet and took out a small tube. She squeezed some cream onto her fingers and applied it to my face. I wondered who was really struggling in this moment. What could I say to make things better? Before I could think of a response, Cheryl and my brother Tommy barged in. Noelle had never met my brother, so she was surprised by his large presence. He was a policeman and wore a serious expression. I noticed her tensing up and moving closer to me. My younger brother often made people uneasy. Just his appearance could calm a situation. He was 6'4", built like a tank with over 200 pounds of muscle. It would have been interesting to see him and Lindenhall face off. They were about the same size. I'd put my money on Tommy in any contest. "There you are." His tone was more challenging than kind. Then he looked me over and added, "At least you're not hurt too bad." I can't say the same for the other guy. He's at Graduate Hospital with a broken cheekbone. He crossed his arms and stepped back for a moment before giving me what I expected. "What were you thinking?" "Dad is going to be furious when he hears this, and you're going to explain it to him, not me." Tommy shook his head. He must have noticed Noelle's concern because he quickly changed his approach. He reached out his hand to her and said, "Sergeant Thomas Stewart, ma'am, I'm this fool's brother." I could see her relax as she shook his hand. Cheryl, standing a bit away, started laughing at his comment. At that moment, I found my voice. "Enough, Tommy. I don't need a lecture right now. How did you even find out?" "Pete, the officers who talked to you are from the 9th District. They work for me. One of them saw the address and thought we might be related, so they called me right away. Now I want to hear your side. What happened?" Little brother was trying to take charge, but that was a bit much for me. I was starting to feel a bit uneasy with all the attention I was getting. "I shared my story with Tommy. I've already involved too many people in this. Just leave it alone. I'm okay, and that's all you need to know." "Is he always like this during the day?" Tommy asked Noelle with a smirk. Noelle smiled back at him. Then he turned to me and said, "I'll go now. You can tell the old man the details. See you later." With that, he and Cheryl left the room. "Lean down a little. I'm not done yet," Noelle said, reaching for the same tube she had used before. "I'm sorry," I replied softly when we were alone. "You should be. You shouldn't have gone with those two. We could have handled them easily. You didn't have to leave. Do you understand what could have happened?" I noticed her hand tremble as she spoke. I hadn't thought about how my choice affected her when I went with Paige and her friend. Noelle and I weren't just co-workers, we were good friends, and I needed to keep that in mind. Her caring nature and concern for my injury only added to my sense of embarrassment. She had a way of reaching my conscience like no one else. After finishing up with my face, Noelle left without another word, leaving me to feel guilty for involving her even a little. There were only a few hours left in the workday, so I stayed in the office until 5 before heading home. I didn't see the point in working late that night. To be honest, I wanted to avoid my usual chat with Noelle. My life felt a bit too complicated right now, and I needed to figure things out on my own. Plus, I knew Dad would be waiting for me at home. I expected a long night of conversations. If I were better at guessing, I might have anticipated Paige's plans long before now. So I wasn't surprised when I got home to find Dad and Aunt Liz waiting for me. They both didn't seem too happy to see me. I was, however, glad to see Liz. Dad had told me that she had been through 2 divorces herself, but you wouldn't know it since she was currently married to our cousin for over a dozen years. My dad had introduced them. They looked like a really happy couple. If their happiness came from their past experiences, then maybe my future had some hope too. I held on to that thought as Liz seemed to be in a bit of a bad mood. She was sitting on the couch while Dad stood nearby. I moved in for the usual hug, hoping to start the conversation on a lighter note. She wasn't having it. "Peter, stop pretending. We both know your actions this afternoon were not okay. But I'm here to discuss something else. Did you read the whole report from the investigators?" "I read it, but not all of it. Is there a problem?" "I think so. What's your relationship with your brother-in-law? Are you on good terms with him?" "Not really. He's not my favorite person. What's this about?" "We might have found evidence of a crime," Liz said. She glanced at my father before looking back at me. "It's fine to tell Dad. What kind of crime are you talking about?" "Domestic abuse." I sat down before responding. "Rob can be full of himself, but I can't picture him being hurt by Dana. Not him, her. She's the one causing harm." My expression must have shown my disbelief. How could a tall man like him be a victim of his much shorter wife? Before I could voice my thoughts, Liz continued. "She's the one. It's in one of the transcripts. She uses her strength to control him. This has likely been happening throughout their marriage, possibly even before. Don't let your assumptions fool you. 1 in 10 people who report domestic abuse are men. Because of the stigma, it's likely even more go unreported. I just can't picture it. Think of a well-known actor like Humphrey Bogart. He was a man who faced harm at the hands of his wife. Forget your biases. Your brother-in-law's situation is real. I assume you want to talk to him. I'd like to help, but I'm not the right person for this. We don't get along. If I called him, he would know something's up." Liz thought about this for a moment. She seemed set on talking to Rob. I realized she didn't have to get involved, but I sensed she wouldn't just ignore this. "I know a manager at Rob's company. Jerry is a good friend. I'll ask him to introduce you." "I can make the call, Liz," my father said. "You don't need to get mixed up in this." A look passed between them that I couldn't understand. She seemed determined, though, and Dad eventually agreed. It was rare to see him step back like that. At that point, I decided to leave the conversation and went to my room. I turned on my laptop and inserted the CD Hollis had given me. For the next 3 hours, I looked over the investigator's report, including the part that had made Liz worried. The most concerning part was a conversation between Paige and Dana after I had questioned Dana about another man. It went like this. Paige: "I think Peter knows about Richard and me." Dana: "How much?" Paige: "I'm not sure. He mentioned someone saw us at a restaurant recently. I don't think he knows who it is yet." Dana: "What? Recently, and you're only telling me now? You're moving too fast with him. You need to be careful until next fall." Paige: "Richard isn't right for me. I'm trying to end things." Dana: "You can't do that. He fits all the signs. We've worked too hard to just let him go because you're not strong enough to handle him." Paige: "I'm not weak. He's too pushy. He's practically following me everywhere." Dana: "So? Remember when I had issues with Rob? It took a year to sort that out. Even now, he still tests me sometimes. Just last week, I almost lost my cool with him. You've only been dealing with Richard for a few months. You need to be more patient. In the end, it will work out. Paige. Richard is not Rob. I doubt he will change. I'm looking for someone else. Dana. Without me? Last time you did that, you ended up marrying someone who wasn't right for you. Look at the problems that caused. If we hadn't helped you go back to school, you'd be stuck without any good options. Paige. We've talked about this. Peter was a mistake. He only met part of the requirements. I didn't know his aunt played such a big role in raising him. But you did the research, not me. Dana. Don't go there, sis. I recommended Farnbach, not Stewart. Farnbach was a great choice. Paige. He was too short. Dana. Forget that. He was perfect. If you had listened to me, you'd be looking at summer houses now and wouldn't have to work. He was much easier to manage. Didn't you say he did well in the market? Paige. Yes, but he lives in Chicago, and that doesn't really matter. I've got Peter and Richard to deal with. Dana. It can still be fixed. Here's what we can do. At that moment, I realized I needed to eat if I wanted to keep going, so I went to the kitchen. It was getting late, so I didn't think Dad would be there too. When I walked in, he was cooking bacon and eggs, which isn't a usual meal for us. Can I join you? I asked. Of course, I'll make a few more eggs. Want any toast? Yes, please. Liz seemed really lively tonight. It's like the topic about Dana hit close to home for her. It did, Dad replied as he turned from the stove. You know Liz was married twice before. What you might not know is that her previous husbands weren't good to her. Liz? It's hard to believe she put up with that. Why do you think that? Just because she's smart and works as a lawyer? Her first husband was a lawyer as well. While he mistreated her, Liz was still a sitting judge. When she left him, she ended up with another man who had similar issues. How did she change that pattern? Therapy for a few years and a supportive circle of friends. Do you want some coffee? No, it's too late for that. I'll stick with juice. Well, that explains her reaction tonight. This situation with Rob and Dana was very important to her. Very important. After dinner, I decided to do a bit of work. Around midnight, an idea came to me. I turned on my laptop again and searched for something Paige had said after she decided to end things with Lindenhall. It took a little while, but then everything clicked into place. Chapter 9. The Christmas party hadn't really thought about my life alone. Many of my goals had involved Paige. Now I wasn't sure if those goals still made sense. Suddenly they felt out of place. This was a common issue for me. Things just didn't seem to fit together. I knew that one day the confusion would clear up, but I had no idea when. I started working more to fill the time, and a bit of sadness started to creep in. I say a bit because my dad was there to help me now and then. Plus, I felt it was more important to connect with my family. I was invited to dinner at least twice a week by different relatives. I also began calling my brother and cousins more often, and took my role in the family more seriously. I had pushed them away while I was married to Paige, and now I realized how much I had missed them. They all seemed eager to support me during my divorce, wanting to keep me close. Still, I was not looking forward to the Christmas holidays. My hard work meant I was gaining respect at my job, but in my personal life, I felt like a failure. I often wondered how I could have stopped Paige from leaving. Yet, I still felt some guilt about my marriage falling apart. The festive decorations and songs only made me feel worse. I thought about seeing a therapist, but my pride held me back. I believed I could improve my mood on my own. I think Noelle noticed my change in mood, even though I tried to hide it at work. By mid-December, she was asking me to promise I would go to the company Christmas party. I knew I needed to change my routine, so I reluctantly said yes. I also wanted to support her since she rarely attended these gatherings. Traditionally, the holidays were also a time for promotions and job changes. Our branch manager and his assistant were promoted at the start of the month. I wasn't surprised, as rumors had been circulating for a while. I had even asked Noelle about them more than once. Our branch manager, Sanderson, had a replacement on the same day the promotions were announced. We received an experienced employee from New York named Donald Baldwin. I didn't see much of Sanderson, even though he was my superior. He was Noelle's boss, and she talked to him regularly, so having a new leader didn't really matter to me. His office was on the floor above ours, where the main sales and office staff worked, and I didn't expect to run into him often. I knew one of his first tasks was getting to know his team, and he approached this with a lot of enthusiasm. Unfortunately, his way of connecting with people felt a bit intrusive. He often crossed boundaries. For instance, when I was presenting, Baldwin would come by and act like he was part of the group. He would ask questions without introducing himself first, and his questions often missed the point. Instead of assisting our customers, they just created confusion. But how can you tell your boss to stop? I began avoiding the cafeteria because of him. He would come to our table if there was a seat, and soon the questioning would start, often delving into matters that felt too personal for a work environment. One afternoon, while I was having lunch, he asked about my estranged wife in a manner that caught me off guard. I couldn't remember how we got to that topic, but clearly recalled his question. I responded with a polite but firm no. After a couple of weeks, I found him quite unpleasant. I figured it was only a matter of time before he made a significant mistake, and his superiors would need to intervene. Still, he could be amusing enough to distract me from my own issues. What bothered me most was that he was overly familiar. During conversations, he would often place his hand on a shoulder or back. With the women, it felt like he crossed lines. They hadn't voiced their discomfort yet, but I was waiting for that moment. Noelle seemed especially uneasy around him. In the first few weeks, he only saw me a few times, while he dropped in on her 2 or 3 times a day. Our routine of meeting in her office after work became increasingly important. She used those times to find refuge from Baldwin. Officially, we were reviewing the day and planning for the next, but I sensed there was more to it. I tried to ask her how she was managing, but she offered short responses and quickly shifted the conversation away from that topic. At first, I thought Noelle could handle everything, but a few weeks into December, I wasn't so sure anymore. I noticed she was starting to revert to her old self. She was wearing those stiff business suits again that made her look less relaxed. Her friendly smile had been replaced by a serious expression reminiscent of when I first met her. She also seemed to be distancing herself from her team. This was really worrying for me. I knew the real Noelle, and it felt like she was trying to hide her softer side from everyone. I cared about her well-being, but she wouldn't talk about what was bothering her at work. If someone was bothering her, I wanted to help. I thought maybe the upcoming Christmas party would be a good time to discuss it. The Christmas party was on Friday, December 22nd. It had been a good year for the company, and especially for our office. We had proved the critics wrong who thought we would struggle after last year's success. The party was being held in a lovely ballroom at one of the best hotels in the city. As usual, everyone from our area was invited along with their partners. We were expecting nearly 500 guests. I knew Noelle was bringing her mother, so I convinced my dad to come as my guest. He wasn't thrilled about my plan to set him up again, but I didn't mind. Even though he was quite social, I wanted him to focus on one person. He was currently without a girlfriend. In nearly 20 years, he had never been in a relationship longer than 6 months. This was a worry for our family. I secretly hoped that Muriel might change that. When we arrived, I guessed there were about 400 people in the ballroom. I introduced my dad to my colleagues. Many of the single women had brought their mothers or sisters along. I found it a bit funny to see how they reacted when I greeted them. Some of the women were really friendly. My dad was enjoying my embarrassment and struggled to hold back laughter during our conversations. Between guests, he started teasing me. "So, did you bring me as a bodyguard or a chaperone tonight?" he joked. "Dad, it's not what you think. I don't know why this is happening. I've only said hello to most of these ladies. That last one, Shelley, she's only met me once, and that was a long time ago. I don't get why she acted like that," I replied. "Oh, you don't know, huh?" my dad said, patting my back. Just then, I felt someone touch my arm. I turned and saw Noelle, with her mother standing a step behind her. I quickly looked at Noelle and was taken aback. The French braid she used to wear was gone. She had a brand new hairstyle. Her hair was cut very short, only a few inches long. Instead of looking strange, it made her face and neck stand out more. Some women might struggle with this look, but for Noelle, it made her pretty face even more stunning. From the side, you could see the gentle curve of her neck, and when she turned to face you, her serious eyes seemed to look right into your soul. I was completely captivated. I noticed she was wearing a lovely dark green dress that fit her well. The dress had thin straps and ended a few inches above her knees, highlighting her legs and stylish shoes. If she meant to downplay her femininity, she had accidentally done the opposite. Everything about her radiated charm. When I looked back at her face, her serious eyes held my gaze. I felt a bit flustered for staring at my friend, and to my surprise, she seemed slightly reserved as well. I had always recognized Noelle's appeal, but now it felt undeniable. Standing at 5'8", she was already tall for a woman. With her shoes, she was almost as tall as me, making it hard to look away. Just then, Muriel stepped in to give me a warm hug, and after we separated, I introduced both of them to my father. My dad and Muriel connected much quicker than Noelle and I did. Within moments, they were deep in conversation, seemingly forgetting everyone else in the room. While they chatted, I took a moment to observe Muriel. Calling her radiant would be an understatement. Though her dress and hair were different from Noelle's, Muriel had a welcoming presence that drew others in. If I hadn't been so focused on her daughter, I might have tried to spend all my time with her. Still, Dad was handling the conversation wonderfully. It soon became clear that our parents didn't need us there. So Noelle and I found a table for the four of us. Our talk felt light but slightly awkward. The ease we usually shared seemed to have disappeared. I understood why, but I didn't want to admit that I might see her as more than a friend. The setting helped me hide my feelings. The hotel had created a wonderful dinner experience. The food was delicious and the service was excellent. I was surprised to find out that it was Noelle who had planned everything for this event, choosing the hotel, the menu, and even the entertainment. I asked her about her role, and finally, we found a topic we could discuss comfortably without any tension. Across the table, Muriel and my dad chatted away until the meal ended and the music began. The lights in the hall dimmed to enhance the atmosphere. At that moment, our parents left, and I didn't see them again until later. As we talked about the party details, I felt a twinge of annoyance when one of Noelle's colleagues invited her to dance. I gave him a look that showed my feelings. In response, I ended up dancing with his wife, but it didn't quite alleviate my mood. The song was lively, and I hardly had time to think about the evening. When the song finished, I stepped away from the table and began to move around the room. I needed a little space from my delightful dinner partner. I was starting to feel a bit possessive, and this break might help both of us. I'm not typically very smooth in these situations, but tonight I wanted to express my gratitude to as many people from the office as possible for their support over the year. I found that my appreciation was warmly received, even by those I had only spoken to briefly. I was pleasantly surprised that most people had nice things to say about Noelle, too. Talking to everyone took me about an hour. Suddenly, I felt a strong urge to return to Noelle, and I began to look around the hall, hoping she hadn't left. I spotted her across the room talking with Baldwin, who was standing at a distance from me. It seemed he was too close for comfort, and I noticed his hand moving on her back. I quickly made my way through the crowd, keeping them in view. As I got closer, I saw his hand resting on Noelle's lower back. I noticed her hand tighten into a fist as I approached. If I didn't get there soon, things could quickly escalate. "Hey, boss. Oh, hi, Don, but I need to borrow this lady for a moment. She promised me a dance before the night ends," I called out, raising my voice to draw attention. As I spoke, I firmly took her hand and led her towards the dance floor. At first, she seemed hesitant, almost ready to confront him. He didn't seem bothered by my interruption and just moved aside. I guided Noelle towards the dance floor. She followed reluctantly, but I kept pulling her along. Soon, I had her in my arms and we began to dance. She was still looking away from me, trying to find Baldwin. "What a jerk," she said as I wrapped my arms around her waist. "It's okay. Please don't let him ruin the evening," I whispered. As I spoke, her body relaxed and she turned to face me. She was still upset, but her face softened a bit when she saw my smile. Besides, I already knew he was a jerk. With that, she laughed and hugged me tightly. The song was a slow ballad. Since it was the first time I had ever held her, I wanted to enjoy the moment. When the hug finished, we were standing a respectful distance apart, but we both seemed to want to be a little closer, so as we danced, our bodies gradually moved together. One of my hands held hers, while my other hand gently touched her back. I moved my cheek close to hers, and she sighed softly as her hand slipped from mine and her arms wrapped around my neck. My boss and friend was showing her feelings with this gesture. Sometimes I surprised myself by my own ignorance about women. I hadn't realized she might see me as more than a friend. But while my mind processed this, I felt myself responding in kind. I could sense her excitement, and I was feeling it too. This was more than just a friendly dance. I had never shared this kind of movement with any woman before. In this moment, I discovered the joy of dancing with someone special. Yes, I thought about the word love and Noelle in the same thought. My focus was entirely on her. I noticed her every breath and the places we touched, where our bodies met, how our legs brushed together. Her perfume surrounded me, and I knew it would always remind me of her. I felt captivated by this woman and held her a little tighter, not wanting to let go. I felt the softness of her face as I leaned in closer. It seemed like the song was playing for ages. I wanted to embrace her even more. I wanted to protect her and understand her kind side. I wanted to cherish that feeling with her and her alone. Suddenly, I felt a change in myself. I stood taller and felt stronger. Deep down, I realized that no matter what happened in my life, whether with my wife, my job, or anything else, she would be there for me. I could see her in my future. She was a part of it. I slowly moved my hand from her back up to her neck, gently stroking the soft hair there. She turned her head to look at me. I saw a question in her eyes, and it was exactly what I had wanted to see. Then I leaned in closer. It started as a gentle moment, but soon I felt a deep connection. I wanted to be close to her more than anything, but I knew we had to be mindful. I gently pulled back and held her close. She understood as I felt her warm presence near me. Eventually, the song came to an end. We slowly stepped away from each other, and I led her back to our table. I thought about putting my arm around her chair, but decided against it. Instead, she placed her hand on my knee, and I covered hers with mine, giving it a gentle squeeze. In life, there are moments when everything feels right, when you know you are exactly where you are meant to be. For me, this was that moment. Chapter 10. Friends and New Faces. Noelle and I stayed close for the rest of the evening. Whether we were at the table, dancing, or walking through the crowd, we were always in contact. These little gestures probably meant more to everyone around us than the words spoken on the dance floor. Our parents found us later that night. Muriel seemed quite taken with my dad, and it showed in the way she looked at him. By this time, many of our friends had gone home, and the ballroom lights were bright again. After my dad and Muriel arrived, Noelle and I didn't say much to each other. They talked a lot while we smiled politely. 30 minutes later, as the staff began clearing the chairs, we shared a final hug and left together just like we had arrived. That night, sleep was hard to find. Deep down, I knew I was drawn to Noelle, and it was more than just a physical attraction. I realized that I was afraid to think about the possibility that she might see me as more than a friend. With this thought came the need to make a clear path for us. I considered all the reasons not to pursue a relationship with Noelle. I was still married, going through a divorce would complicate things, she was my boss, and she was slightly older than me. I also wondered if she was just a rebound after my marriage ended. These were serious issues, but I set them aside one by one. They didn't change my feelings. She was my best friend, and what had happened that night shifted our friendship into something new. I finally realized we had been on the edge of something special for a long time. In my heart, I knew I had to go after her, but I also felt that our timing wasn't great. I wanted to start our relationship without any past issues getting in the way. It would be smarter to wait until my marriage was truly over. Still, the opportunity was here now. I wasn't sure how long it would last, especially with the legal matters still between Paige and me. So, I made my decision. That morning, I made breakfast by myself because Dad had left a note saying he was going shopping with Muriel. I couldn't help but laugh. This was funny for two reasons. Dad rarely left notes about where he was going, and he really didn't like shopping. I couldn't imagine him pushing through a crowd of last-minute shoppers. He had never done that before. I couldn't wait to share this with Tommy. His absence was helpful, though. It gave me the quiet I needed to think. After breakfast, I logged into our online systems and filled out the forms to ask for a transfer. The idea of starting fresh in a new office made me a bit nervous, but my feelings for Noelle were worth that small challenge. I requested a move to Cherry Hill, New Jersey. It was less than 20 miles away and would give us the space we needed. I knew some people there and thought they'd say good things about me to the branch manager. Plus, they were looking for another salesman since they had recently lost one. With how I felt about Noelle, working closely with her was no longer a good idea. We had made our feelings for each other pretty clear, which could create problems, especially for her since she was my boss. Leaving would help her keep the gossip under control. I had just put on my coat to leave the house when the doorbell rang. I hurried to answer it, hoping it might be her. My mood changed when I saw my soon-to-be ex-wife standing there. I tried to hide my disappointment. Looking back at the street, I saw she was alone, so I continued to leave. "Excuse me, I'm heading out," I said while locking the door. "Peter, we need to talk." I turned to look at her again. She stood there, looking worried and uncomfortable. She was dressed nicely, like someone who belonged on a magazine cover. I could see she was upset, but sadly for her, I wasn't moved by it. It must have shocked her when I stepped around her and went down the steps to the sidewalk. "Peter." "What?" By now, we were a little further apart. I paused to let her catch up. "Why are you here? If you have things to discuss, talk to your lawyer. We shouldn't speak directly. Can't you see that?" "No, I don't. You don't understand." She shifted her weight, looking down for a moment. "Please, just give me a chance to explain." "You owe me that much." "Owe you? You've got this all wrong. I don't owe you anything." I tried to sound tough, but deep down I knew I needed her to explain herself. There were things I didn't understand about her recent behavior, and it was bothering me. I took a breath and said, "I have a few minutes. Let's talk." "Not here on the street. Can't we go back inside and talk like normal people?" As I started to walk away, I replied, "No, like I said, I only have a few minutes, so please keep it short." Paige found a nearby step and sat down. "You're not making this easy for me. I guess I deserve that. I'm sorry, Peter. I made a mistake. We had a deal and I ended it. I wanted to tell you, but I thought it would be easier if you didn't know." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I don't want to lose you. I don't want this divorce." That didn't make much sense to me. A month ago, I would have let my anger out on her, but today, that anger had faded. I still had feelings for her, but it wasn't love. I decided to listen to her. Noelle's advice about hearing someone with an open heart resonated with me. After 7 years together, I owed Paige at least that much. I sat next to her on the step, which made her smile a little. I spoke calmly, which seemed to make her uneasy. I didn't expect much from her confession, so I was ready to be doubtful. "You didn't lose me. You pushed me away. I doubt you ever thought about me and your choices. Did you know I hired someone to find out the truth? I couldn't trust you to be honest, so go ahead and talk. But I already know most of your story." I paused and looked away from her. I wanted to see if she would keep lying, knowing I had the facts. I was aware of her actions with Lindenhall. I had proof, including photos and recordings of her planning with Dana. Would she be honest about this? It wouldn't save our marriage, but she might keep some respect in the process. "I figured you would know. I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to hurt me. You invited him into our home, Paige. You showed him off to our neighbors. I find that pretty hurtful. And why did you bring him to my workplace? If that wasn't meant to embarrass me, what was it? It wasn't what you think. I wanted to speak with you privately. When I told Richard it was over and that I was coming to see you, he insisted on coming with me. He really made it clear how much his family meant to him. If things were over, then why were you still talking to him? And what was this arrangement you had with him? Why does it matter? It's done. It never should have happened. I wanted to tell you, but I couldn't. I thought I could fix things without you finding out. I know I was selfish." She paused, looking at me for a moment before placing her hand gently on my arm. Her voice softened. "You've always supported me. I can't imagine my life without you. I'll do anything to make things right." She spoke those words with a lot of emotion. From listening to her past conversations, I felt that Paige was the one in control of their relationship. The only other important person was Dana, who seemed to have influenced Paige during all this. I wanted to know more, but I decided to let my wife explain. I looked at the cars parked outside. "How can we start over, Paige? Will you at least share why you got involved with him?" I turned to face her. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath before answering. "It was the pressure and fear of failing. I know it sounds simple, but you can't imagine how frightened I was during my first week of classes. Do you remember how I was when I saw you every night? I hardly spoke. I barely ate. I think I woke you up more than once because I couldn't settle down. That's what you noticed. When I was on campus, I felt even more anxious. I knew you were worried and wanted me to talk, but I just couldn't. I thought orientation would make things easier, but they missed a lot, and since it was August, there weren't many people around to help. The staff were away, and most students were new too. I felt like I couldn't ask anyone. I was getting more and more frustrated. Anyway, towards the end of that week, I was in the bookstore looking for 2 software programs I needed for my risk management class. I was worried, thinking about how I would learn statistics and figure out the software. You know I'm not good with computers. I would have helped you. I know you would have, but it was more than that, and you weren't there. I found the software and started reading the packaging. I felt panic creeping in. That's when Richard showed up. At first, I was annoyed because I knew he was trying to flirt, but then he said we were in the same class and that he was experienced with the software. We started talking. He joked about the whole process. It felt like he understood how I was feeling. Everything that worried me, schoolwork, teachers, our advisors, our labs, became a joke to him. He seemed to know everything. He had connections with many of the professors because of his job, and some helped him with advice. Soon, we were having lunch together, and I began to notice him more. He seemed completely confident. He was sure of himself and a bit cheeky, but he could back it up. I found myself envying him. After that, we started sitting together in class. I decided this, but I knew he liked it. He made me feel comfortable and like I belonged. Over time, I grew more confident just being with him. When questions came up, he sensed them before I said anything. It was strange. Before long, I relied on him to help me with the workload. So, when the first study group was formed, it made sense for us to join together. By the end of our second week, we spent about 12 hours a day together, sometimes longer. It became my routine to look for him when I arrived at school in the morning. We would have coffee and then go through our day together. So, it didn't feel strange when about a month later I found myself at his apartment. Part of me hoped for a deeper connection. It was flattering. He tried to hide it, but I sensed he had feelings for me. She paused for a moment and looked at me, trying to read my feelings before she continued. She had something difficult to share about Lindenhall. I decided to stay calm and not say anything just then. I met her gaze without showing my thoughts, so she went on. In a way, he had already won me over, so I followed him willingly. She sighed before saying more. Anyway, we ended up close at his apartment. I thought it was a mistake. Now she was looking at me sincerely, waiting for my reaction. It sounds simple, Paige. A led to B led to C, and D just followed. But now, you're saying it was a mistake. You kept making choices that were similar. You got attached to him quickly. I understand that. You're supposed to make connections and friends in school. But what I don't get is how you went from being friends to getting so close to him. Just because he's helpful doesn't mean he deserves your affection regularly. I noticed she shifted uncomfortably after my last comment. I wanted it to make her think, but also didn't want her to stop talking. So, after a long pause, I added, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say it like that. I'm just trying to understand this. I'm confused, Paige. Why him? Why did you choose him first? I'm your husband. We spent over 2 years getting you ready for this. And then you turned to him instead of me. Why didn't you come to me? Wasn't I good enough? It's complicated. I don't fully get it myself. That's not true, and you know it. Why didn't you talk to me, Paige? Why? She kept her eyes down, speaking softly to the ground. Her words sounded heavy. I didn't think you would understand. Wouldn't understand? Who knew you best? Who put in the time to help you get ready for this change? Who worked hard to give you that chance? What could I not understand? You say you want me in your life, but then you shut me out when I ask what I have the right to ask. So much for wanting me back, I said sharply. Paige frowned, biting her lip before finally saying, Okay, I'll explain. Richard understood the situation better. We just clicked more. Peter, I care for you, but you're not very driven. You've been in that job for over 5 years and haven't tried to move up. I hoped you would see that path and take it. You're smart, smarter than Rob, yet he's moving up while you're still selling computers for little pay. I wanted the best for you, but you seem okay where you are. I'm not. I aim to achieve big things, and this is my first step. How could I share that with you? My degree opens up opportunities that you might not see. When I looked at Richard, I saw someone who wanted more like I do. He wanted to be in charge, to be successful, and he wanted the rewards that come with it. As I got to know him and his background, I realized he was familiar with the kind of life I want. His family has connections that could help me, so it made sense to talk to him. But things got complicated. He tried to take your place. Finally, some honesty, I thought. Up until now, she had been telling a story that didn't match what I knew. I kept going along. Well, I can't blame him. You gave him a chance for nearly 2 months. Why wouldn't he feel he had a shot? Somehow she was turning this situation into a question of my resolve, or lack of it. It struck me that I had underestimated Paige again. Just like back when I thought she didn't understand finances. The reality was quite the opposite. She was very sharp when it came to money. She knew my income had been rising every year. Last year, I was close to 6 figures, and this year I'd already surpassed it. I earned more than many of the managers in my office. Paige signed our tax returns each year. At first, I thought she didn't take the time to read them. But she did read them, and she understood them. I had assumed Paige needed to learn about business and about people. I made a mistake. As she thought about what she had just shared with me, I decided to ask more about her plan regarding Lindenhall. When did you discover that Lindenhall had worked with Dana? My question seemed to break her focus. She wasn't ready for it. She recovered quickly, but I could see the gears turning in her mind before she responded. Oh, I told Dana about Richard right after our first meeting. When she heard his name, she looked surprised and worried it might affect her. Richard's father is a big partner at her firm. She told me to be careful and to let him down gently so it wouldn't cause any trouble for her job or my marriage. Oh, I replied, trying to keep my emotions in check. I wanted to show her that it was okay to continue. Inside, though, I was overwhelmed with frustration. I didn't want her to see just how much I disapproved of her actions. I knew it was wrong, Peter. I never stopped caring about you. I felt I needed Richard, too. It's hard for me to say that, but whenever I was with him, I thought of you. The weight of that just grew each time, so I ended it. I realized how selfish I was. Losing you is something I can't imagine. I've replayed everything in my mind. I know I could have managed things with Richard without crossing a line. I made a mistake. But please believe me, I care for you. I'll do anything to win you back. I know you still have feelings for me. I can see it in your eyes. Maybe if we go to counseling, we can. Counseling won't help us, Paige. I don't trust you. Even now, you're not being straightforward with me. You say you care? Why do I doubt that? You were with him last time I saw you. I wouldn't be surprised if you still are. No, I've told him many times that it's over. You've told him many times? I echoed with a hint of disbelief. Suddenly, everything made sense. I couldn't help but smile at her situation. I should have figured it out. His calls were desperate for her to keep seeing him, and then he showed up at my office with her. That was probably uninvited. Mr. Lindenhall had transitioned from a lover to someone who wouldn't let go. I needed to dig deeper, so I asked her more. Well, Paige, you spent time with him and had a relationship for months. You even invited him to our apartment. He probably thought he had the right to be there. She frowned at that remark. I believed she was beginning to realize how hopeless her argument was. Why did he come with you the last time we met? I can't accept your excuse about protecting family. His presence wasn't needed. You both knew it would create confusion and stop us from having a real conversation. Paige paused. Richard wanted to talk to you. I told him about the time you confronted me about seeing someone else. He kept asking if you had said anything afterward. I told him no. I thought you had moved on since you didn't seem ready to talk to me again. He thought you were being passive for not pursuing it. Then, you served me with divorce papers and sent copies to his wife. He was really angry. When we met, he told you part of the truth. He came with me because of his wife, but his main goal was to provoke you. He wanted to confront you, to remove you as his rival. His feelings for me complicated things for him. I started to see what Lindenhall was up to. He wasn't just satisfied with being with my wife. He wanted to see me embarrassed so I wouldn't attempt to mend things. He truly believed he loved her. So I stopped his show in front of you by standing up to him? I asked. Paige nodded. She paused as she noticed me standing up from the steps, brushing off my clothes. I moved closer and adjusted my coat. Until then, her story had been impressive. I admired her storytelling and especially liked the arrangement part. I could tell she had made that part up on the spot. She would do well in advertising, but the last 10 minutes were filled with inaccuracies. Thankfully, I had proof. I suppose I surprised you too. I didn't know I was the focus in that confrontation. So now I'm good enough for you? Is that why you're here today? No, it can't just be that, can it? Because I'm supposed to remember that you care for me, right? You really care for me. Yes, Peter, I do care for you, she replied. And you can honestly say that after what happened before? Her eyes widened. It was clear she wanted to respond, but no words came out. She sat back down on the steps, listening closely. I knew the secret she kept hidden more than anything else. She was stunned that I was aware of it. She blinked, unable to process my words as I continued. I thought my knowledge of it would stay secret. I had planned to use it only as a last resort if she didn't agree to the financial deal. But now I had found another way to use what I knew. Does he know? Does Lindenhall know what happened in the past? No, he doesn't, does he? I don't fully grasp this yet. You wanted to be with him, but you ended things instead? If I didn't know better, I would think you changed your mind. But it's simpler than that. You didn't want to embrace parenthood, under any circumstances. Paige stared at me, wide-eyed and shaken, unable to respond. When I read the private investigator's report, I was heartbroken. They recorded your talks with the clinic, and there it was, the appointment. By the way, did they tell you which medicine caused that awful rash? You really should find out. It's already happened twice. I think the first time was last year, right? Was that our baby then, Paige? I can see it on your face. You never told me. You didn't give it a chance to grow or even let me try to talk you into keeping it. Maybe it would have still ended this way, but at least I would have known. There might have been hope. You ended our child's journey, Paige, my child. For that, I can't forgive you. And the story you just told? It was clever, really. I know about your plan with Dana. She picked Lindenhall for you based on some profile, just like you picked me 7 years ago. You really are something else. I took a moment to breathe. She was just staring at me now. The tears were gone. I didn't see fear or regret, but something new that I had never seen from her before. Indifference. As if it didn't matter that I knew. After meeting her 2 times because she insisted, I wanted to make sure this would be the last. Oh, one more thing. Don't contest the divorce or the settlement. Let it go. Don't even come to court. Just sign the papers. All anyone needs to know is that we had differences that couldn't be worked out. No details are necessary. But if you or your lawyer give me any trouble, I'll make all of this public. You don't want that? I didn't wait for her answer. I turned away and began to walk. I noticed there were no footsteps behind me. When I reached my car, she was nowhere to be seen. I drove off, trying to regain the calm I had before her visit. After reading the investigator's report, before I knew about Dana and Paige's plan, I found out about her past. I couldn't understand how she let Lindenhall become part of her life. I was still wrestling with that when I discovered it wasn't her first time. When the investigators mentioned her appointment, I almost lost it. The method she used started to make sense. I didn't know anything about it, so I did some research. One side effect caught my eye. We had a bug on our phone that picked up that last detail. Otherwise, I would never have known it was her second. In fact, she was the one who reminded the clinic about her earlier problem with the rash. That was the end for us. With Lindenhall, it was more complicated. She went after him. She caught him, and then for some reason she let him go. If I was right, she found something unsettling about him. My guess is he was a bit too much for her, like she claimed. I began to notice the curves of her body and the way her movements captivated me. The gentle rise and fall of her belly drew me in, and I felt a sense of comfort as we shared this moment together. Noelle broke the spell by starting to help me remove my clothes, showing a sweetness in her actions. When my last piece of clothing was set aside, she held me gently, expressing warmth and care. She quickly realized that her movements had started something special. I reached for the blankets and shifted us both, helping her lie back as our eyes locked in connection. She smiled at me, a warmth in her gaze. I should really freshen up first, she said, though she didn't move to get up. We can do that later, I replied. Feeling her legs shift, she pulled me closer with a hand resting behind my head, inviting me to savor the moment. I drew back slowly but sensed her wanting to keep us close. Then she whispered something that made me smile. I'm ready. For now. With that, I positioned myself carefully, touching her gently as we continued to share our closeness. I felt her warmth and softness, and even though things were a bit new for both of us, we took our time exploring this new bond. As I paused to let her adjust, I could feel her respond, encouraging us to continue. I moved slowly, wanting to be mindful until we were fully connected. Her soft sounds and breathing signaled our shared enjoyment. The connection grew as I moved in a steady rhythm, feeling the bond between us deepen. Her breath quickened and I could sense her excitement. We were completely wrapped up in each other, embracing the moment fully and feeling a mix of tenderness and intensity. In the midst of it all, I felt a wave of joy wash over me, and I closed my eyes, lost in the sensation of being so close to her. I was trying to steady my breath, enjoying the warmth between us, feeling content to just be there together. I gently shifted us around, letting Noelle lay on top of me, and it felt perfect to hold her close. She gasped in surprise as I felt her adjust to a new position. Her fingers danced along my sides, making me squirm a little. "Why did you do that?" "I wanted to stay where I was," I said. "It was too much weight for you," she replied. "Too much weight? You don't weigh more than 180 pounds. I can lift almost 150 pounds. I'll let you know next time if it's too much." I thought. I should start exercising so this wonderful 125-pound woman doesn't outlift me one day. I smiled at the thought, which made her tickle me even more. Eventually, we separated. As Noelle walked toward the shower, I couldn't help but admire her again, her legs, her smile, and how she turned around. "Stop it. You're making me feel self-conscious. We're supposed to be taking a shower." Even though my admiration was innocent, I often thought about it afterward. After we showered, neither of us wanted to get dressed. We ended up back in bed, me leaning on a pillow, her resting on my chest. "I need to tell you something," Noelle said as she shifted to lie beside me. Her face grew serious. I wasn't ready for a serious talk yet. "I hope it's not about our little break. I'll promise to take my time next time. Peter, I need to say this." "Okay, I'm listening." I noticed a hint of worry in her voice, which felt odd considering how light-hearted we'd been. "There are no secrets between us." She took a breath. "I own this house." "I figured," I said. "No, I mean I own it completely. There's no mortgage. I paid cash." That caught my attention. What was she getting at? "You know that Sam passed away in a train accident. Well, there's more to the story. The engineer was drinking at the time, and that caused the accident." "I'm sorry, I know you cared for Sam very much." "That's not it, Peter. I did care for him, but it's not what I'm trying to say. The company knew about his issue but did nothing. My lawyers found out, we sued, and then they offered a settlement. I won't shy away from telling you. I'm doing well. Not super rich, but I'm a millionaire. The settlement was for $13 million. After paying my lawyers, I had over $8 million left. I used some of that to buy this house." "Oh," was all I could manage to say. I thought about what she shared and looked into her eyes, which showed she wanted more from me. "Well, we all have our issues. For me, I was seriously thinking about going to therapy right after New Year. Now I know I definitely will." Noelle sat in silence, her face serious. After almost a minute, I smiled, pulled her close, and we shared a gentle moment. Pulling away with wide eyes, I said, "There's only one thing better than having a smart, beautiful, and loving partner. That's having one who's wealthy." 10 minutes later, she was happily tickling me. This took place in the last months of 2000. My divorce was finalized in July of the following year. It should have happened earlier, but Paige tried to get me to pay for her school fees. I owe Liz for helping me avoid that, even though I still had to provide support for 6 months. True to her promise, Liz set up several meetings with Rob. He didn't do as well as I did. He ended up in the hospital for stress. He's back to work now, but strangely his marriage to Dana didn't last. Their divorce was very public and messy. Sadly, Liz represented Rob in that case, and she was quite tough in her approach. Dana ended up with less than $10,000 when it was all over. She received the money while Liz gained a stronger reputation. Richard Lindenhall was expelled from Wharton for bothering a fellow student. His wife, the former Miss Allison Goodwin, did very well in their divorce. Last I heard, Richard had moved away to the Midwest. Dad and Muriel got married exactly 1 year after they first met. Their joy as a couple has brightened our whole family. He also started working again. In 2002, he was hired by the Department of Homeland Security to work with the Philadelphia police. I guess once you're in law enforcement, you never really leave it. Noelle and I got married in August 2001. The bride looked stunning, and she was 6 months pregnant. Our son, Peter Stewart III, was born in November that year. His brother Aaron arrived in March 2003, and their baby sister Rachel was born in July 2005. Noelle is my wife, my closest friend, and the love of my life. She taught me that living well is the best kind of revenge. We are doing very well together. As for Paige, she moved to Chicago after our divorce. I've cautioned Moss about her. Hey, listeners, if you enjoyed watching this video and want to stay updated with our latest content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss out on what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video with Queen Cheating Tales.